Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Osman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's Turkey that says it will end its operation in northeastern Syria if all Kurdish fighters withdraw from Ankara's proposed safe zone. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Operation Peace Spring will only end after Turkey achieves its goals. Earlier, Russian President Vladimir Putin discussed the situation in Syria with Erdogan over the phone. Putin asked to take steps to prevent clashes between the Turkish and Syrian government forces. Meanwhile, Turkey says it has neutralized over 600 terrorists in its military operation in northeastern Syria. Ankara claims its forces have made their way east of the Euphrates River and are now gathering in the west. In a statement, the Defense Ministry said it seized all border towns and villages from Kurdish fighters. But the SDF refute the claims, saying fighting is still underway in the border towns of Tal Abyad and Ras Al Ain. Meanwhile, the Kremlin said Russian-backed Syrian government troops have captured Manbij, which is a key strategic town near Turkey's border. Well, we'll be back with more news right after this short break. Hello and thank you for joining us. Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the US is working to avoid a vacuum in Syria. In an interview, Pompeo said he and Vice President Mike Pence expect to meet Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan this week. He said the US wants to find a solution in Syria without breaking its relationship with Turkey. Pompeo said Turkey should stop its military incursion into Syria. Meanwhile, Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the country will retaliate against US sanctions over its military operation. Now, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Prime Minister Imran Khan had currently fruitful talks with Iran and Saudi Arabia. He was addressing the media in Islamabad, and Qureshi said Iran doesn't want a conflict with Saudi Arabia. This follows the conclusion of Prime Minister Khan's back-to-back visits from Tehran to Riyadh. More in this report. Tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran have escalated after drone attacks on 2 Saudi Arabian oil facilities last month. Now, Pakistan is trying to facilitate talks between Tehran and Riyadh to avoid another conflict in the Gulf. Prime Minister Imran Khan's diplomacy was well received in both capitals, and Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says the Saudi leadership showed a positive attitude towards Pakistan's peace initiative.
After meeting the Saudi leadership, I am very hopeful that the clouds of another conflict in the region have started to disperse. Saudi Arabia wants to give priority to diplomacy.
The foreign minister said Iran is ready for talks with Saudi Arabia to diffuse regional tensions.
Iran has very graciously said it does not want confrontation and they are ready to resolve the issues. They do not want any rivalry with Saudi Arabia and are ready for dialogue.
Qureshi said PM Khan also briefed the leadership of both countries about the human rights situation in occupied Kashmir. He said the two countries have once again reiterated their support for Pakistan's stance on Kashmir. Now, as the ongoing crisis in Kashmir continues, Indian occupation forces killed 3 Kashmiri youths. They were killed during a search operation in the Pazalpora area of the valley. The Indian Army refused to hand over the bodies of the deceased to their families. 11 civilians in October have been killed by occupation forces across the valley in similar operations. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa said Kashmiris are bravely facing Indian atrocities and Pakistan will never abandon them. While staying with Kashmir, New Delhi has shut down mobile networks again in Indian-occupied Kashmir after briefly restoring them. India claimed it restored call and text services for mobile phones on Monday, following a 2-month-long blackout. But it reimposed the shutdown, saying it was causing law and order problems for the Indian Army. The curfew and communications blackout has now entered its 73rd day. Well, the Indian government has decided to monitor all educational institutions inside Indian-occupied Kashmir, and that's to curb protests against its illegal annexation. Special magistrates have been sent to monitor and report day-to-day activities of all students, including primary schools. New Delhi said Kashmir's schools and colleges participate in protests over deaths of civilians or on calls from pro-Kashmir leaders. Last month, India reopened educational institutions in the valley, but government data shows no one is showing up for school out of fear of being arrested. Pakistan has lodged a protest with India as 3 civilians died over recent ceasefire violations along the line of control. Foreign Office spokesperson Mohammed Faisal summoned India's Deputy High Commissioner Gaurav Ahluwalia to record a formal protest. Faisal asked India to respect the 2003 ceasefire arrangement and maintain peace along the LOC. He said India should allow the United Nations to play its role in resolving the Kashmir issue under current UN Security Council resolutions. He said the ceasefire violations are a threat to regional peace. Well, in Afghanistan, 3 security officers have been killed and 27 others injured in a suicide bomb attack in the country's eastern Langman province. A provincial governor spokesman said the death toll may rise further. The bomb exploded outside a police station. Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid confirmed the attack, said the group targeted the police with an explosive-laden truck. Zabiullah claimed the district police chief was also killed in the attack. Israeli forces have detained 22 Palestinians in several raids across the West Bank. Ismail Nohada, a prominent imam of Al-Aqsa Mosque, is among the detainees. Palestine's Prisoner Society said Israeli occupation forces conducted several raids across Ramallah and the Al-Bira district. Nearly 6,000 Palestinians, including women and children, are currently in Israeli detention facilities. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News. The EU says a number of significant issues remain unresolved in last-ditch Brexit talks with the United Kingdom. Briefing the European Commission, Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier said the negotiations have been constructive but not conclusive. Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar said talks between the European Union and Britain have failed to resolve issues. The difficulties centre on trade and the Irish backstop. He was speaking in Dublin, where Varadkar said there is a pathway to a possible deal, but there are many issues that need to be resolved. Varadkar said he spoke to British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Johnson has vowed to take Britain out of the EU on the 31st of October with or without a deal. Well, the EU and the UK have resumed Brexit talks in Brussels, and they're hoping to reach a deal ahead of a key summit. PM Boris Johnson is raging against time to reach a new Brexit deal before the 2-day gathering of EU leaders. He is expected to update the cabinet on the progress of Brexit negotiations. If a deal is not approved by the 19th of October, Johnson is legally obligated to ask the EU for yet another deadline extension. Chief EU negotiator Michel Barnier will later update the bloc on the state of negotiations. Britain is due to leave the EU on October 31st, and Johnson has repeated that he will not request an extension. Well, in Spain, Catalonia's President Quim Torra has called for a new independence referendum. Now, this comes after 9 separatist leaders were sentenced behind bars for 9 and 13 years for provoking protests across the region. Protesters and police clashed in Barcelona on the second day of rallies against the court ruling. Demonstrators set garbage containers on fire and vandalized buildings near the city's main tourist attractions. Police charged at the crowd with batons and fired foam projectiles at protesters. Spain's government issued a statement condemning the clashes. Well, Hong Kong's chief executive Carrie says calls for the territory's independence will not be tolerated. In her annual policy speech, Lam stressed her commitment to the one country, two systems framework. The parallel political system was introduced in Hong Kong after British rule ended. She announced housing and infrastructure policies and said housing was the most urgent issue facing the city. Earlier, Lam was forced to suspend her annual address after being heckled in Parliament. Opposition lawmakers disrupted the Legislative Council session by shouting slogans. The Beijing-backed leader later had to give her speech via a video feed. Now in America, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has held off a vote to authorize an impeachment probe against President Donald Trump. In a press conference, she said there was no need to call a vote just yet. White House officials and Republicans by pressuring Ukraine for political gains. But now she said the impeachment needed to be meticulously in line with constitutional procedures.
We're here to find the truth, to uphold the Constitution of the United States. This is not a game for us. This is deadly serious. And we're on a path that is taking us to a path to truth and a timetable that respects our Constitution.
Now in Pakistan, 13 people have been killed in two separate road accidents. Rescue officials say 29 others have been injured. They said 8 people were killed after a passenger bus fell into a ravine off a mountainous road in Chitral. Officials said 9 others were injured during the crash in another accident. Police said 5 people were killed after a bus overturned on a highway in southern Sindh province. Rescue workers say 4 out of the 29 passengers have sustained life-threatening injuries. Now in Lebanon, firefighters continue to struggle to contain wildfires that broke out on Monday. Beirut has deployed water cannons and called on neighboring countries for help to extinguish the blaze. The Lebanese arm of the Red Cross has said 18 people have been hospitalized because of the fires, and around 90 received emergency medical care. A civil defense official said over 100 new fires broke out over the past 24 hours. At least 3 people, including a firefighter and 2 forestry workers, have died since the fires started. Residents from affected areas have been evacuated to minimize casualties. The fires have overwhelmed Lebanon's fire brigades, prompting appeals of help to the international community. Officials blame uncharacteristically hot and dry weather for the fires. Now in India, farmers have set fire to crop residue in northern Haryana state, and it's contributing to the world's air pollution, experts say. The smoke from Punjab travels to neighbouring regions, leading to a spike in pollution. More in this report.
With the onset of winter, bad breathing air is back in India. Smoke emanates from scores of fields across farm states of Punjab and Haryana. These states are notoriously known for setting fire to large areas of wheat and paddy in preparation for the next season, despite government ban on the practice.
Yes, we know that burning of stubble harms the environment, but we need to remove it. It prepares our farmland for the next crops.
Stubble burning is seen as one of the key factors contributing to the region's smog and dust every year during October and November.
Crop residue burning pollution triggers respiratory issues and eye burning, and many more health complications. To stop this, first we need to educate farmers on alternative methods, and the government has to work from their end.
Climate activists say India is home to 15 of 20 most polluted cities in the world. Air quality in New Delhi has nosedived, with prominent areas, including the presidential palace, covered in smog.
Now in the 1960s, millions across the world stood in awe as Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. But having limited mobility because of his suit, he was seen bunny hopping rather than walking. Now engineers at NASA have been working for years to create a new spacesuit that allows astronauts to be more flexible to try and walk properly on the moon. More in this report.
Spacecraft engineers in the US have developed Orion Crew Survival Suit. It will provide a whole range of motion for astronauts on their next expedition to Moon in 2024. This is possible due to bearings on the waist, arms, and legs. These suits are also extendable and therefore one size fits all.
So the mobility is one of the biggest things. The fact that these bearings kind of go in gives you that great shoulder mobility that you saw. And that's very important for things where we're doing geology tests. If you need to pick up a rock, if you're examining something, if you're planting a scientific instrument, you need that upper torso mobility.
Another key innovation is the suit's unlimited capacity to absorb carbon dioxide, which can be poisonous in a vacuum. The crew survival suit provides full life support for up to 6 days.
This suit is the Orion Crew Survival Suit, and so while the mission of that suit is to what we do when we're there, this is the suit that gets us there and gets us home safely. And so this suit is fully integrated with the vehicle from the ground up. So when it's tailored to the human body, it's also tailored to the seat.
NASA plans to land on the Moon's south pole under its Artemis mission in order to exploit its water ice for life support purposes. The agency views its return to the Moon as a proving ground for an onward mission to Mars in the 2030s.
With us a little bit about how this design.
And now in other news, if you didn't know, the royal couple is in Pakistan. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have visited the foothills of the Hindu Kush mountain range to see how climate change is impacting Pakistan. On the third day of their 5-day trip to Pakistan, Prince William and Kate Middleton arrived to northern district of Chitral, where the Pakistan Meteorological Department briefed them on the area's melting glaciers. The royal couple met with locals in the Kailash Valley and spent time with local children there. They also enjoyed traditional dance performances by the Kailash people. Well, it's nice to see the royal couple having a lovely time in Pakistan. We'll be back with more news right after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now in business news, European stocks have traded lower due to investor skepticism over London's last-ditch Brexit talks with Brussels. The pan-European stock 600 index fell 0.3% as UK Prime Minister Johnson seeks to hammer out a new deal with the EU. The indices of London's FTSE 100 and Paris's CAC 40 have slipped marginally. Germany's DAX 30 has risen fractionally, and the financial services and retail sectors have also shed over 1% in British stocks. Meanwhile, oil prices have jumped over signals from OPEC and its allies that further supply curbs could be possible, but gains were limited due to lingering concerns over global economic slowdown. The Turkish Lira has remained stable despite sanctions imposed against Ankara by Washington over its Syria offensives. Data shows the latest Suez sanctions have limited effect on the country's economy. The dollar-lira exchange rate stood at 5.89 to 1, with no substantial devaluation. The US repeatedly threatened Turkey with the destruction of its economy after its offensives in northern Syria. Italy has approved a new tax on digital companies, including US tech giants. This will oblige companies such as Facebook, Google and Amazon to pay a 3% levy on internet transactions. Washington has repeatedly said the levy is unfairly targeted against US firms. Italy's move could draw threats of retaliation from the US. The levy is due to be introduced from next year. Well, that's one tough lady. Well, it's 26 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.